Daniel never really paid attention to people at work. After everything that happened with his marriage ending, he just wanted to keep his head down and get through each day. The office was just a place to be, nothing more. Coffee in the morning, meetings in the afternoon, and home by 6. That was his life now. And honestly, he preferred it that way. But then he started noticing her. It wasn't anything dramatic at first. Just a feeling, like when you sense someone looking at you from across a room. He'd be typing up a report and something would make him glance up. And there she would be, Lucia, standing by the printer or leaning against the wall near the conference room, just watching him. The first time it happened, Daniel thought maybe he had something on his face. He quickly checked his reflection in his phone screen. Nothing. The second time, he figured she was probably spacing out, staring at nothing. We all do that sometimes, right? But by the third and fourth time, he couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something about the way she looked at him. It wasn't like she had a crush or anything. Daniel had experienced that before, and this was different. Her eyes held something heavier, something that made his stomach feel weird, like she could see right through him, like she knew something about him that even he didn't want to admit. Daniel asked around about her casually, trying not to sound too interested. "Oh, Lucia? She's in the design department," his coworker Tom said. "Super talented, but keeps to herself mostly." "Nice enough, though. Why?" Daniel just shrugged and said he was curious. The watching continued. Every single day, Monday morning team meetings, and she'd be sitting 3 seats away, her eyes flickering toward him every few minutes. Lunch break in the cafeteria, and he'd spot her at a corner table, that same intense gaze fixed in his direction. Even when he left late, she seemed to be there, packing up her things slowly, stealing glances. It should have creeped him out. Any normal person would have felt uncomfortable, maybe even reported it to HR. But strangely, Daniel didn't feel threatened. He felt seen, and that was something he hadn't felt in a very long time. After his wife left, Daniel had become invisible. His friends stopped calling as much. His family walked on eggshells around him. Everyone treated him like broken glass that might shatter if they said the wrong thing. So eventually they stopped saying much at all. He existed, but nobody really looked at him anymore, except Lucia. One Thursday evening, Daniel stayed late to finish a presentation. The office had mostly cleared out, just a few dim lights left on in the hallways. He was so focused on his laptop screen that he didn't notice her at first. But when he finally looked up to stretch his neck, there she was, leaning against the wall outside his office, arms crossed, watching him through the glass partition. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel's heart started beating faster. He thought about waving, maybe mouthing, "Can I help you?" through the glass. But something stopped him. The expression on her face wasn't awkward or embarrassed at being caught. It was concerned. Deeply, genuinely concerned. She straightened up slowly, grabbed her bag from where it sat at her feet, and walked away. But before she turned the corner, she looked back one more time. That look stayed with Daniel all night. He went home to his empty apartment and couldn't stop thinking about it. Why would someone he barely knew look at him like that? Like she was worried about him? Like she was keeping watch over him? Daniel heated up some leftovers that he forgot to eat the night before. He sat on his couch in the dark, the TV playing some show he wasn't really watching. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister asking if he wanted to come to Sunday dinner. He didn't respond. He'd probably ignore it until Sunday came and went like he usually did. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. It had been 8 months since the separation, 6 since the divorce was final. His ex-wife had taken most of the furniture, which Daniel told himself he was fine with. Less stuff to worry about, less to remind him of what he'd lost. But sitting there in the near darkness, he realized the place didn't feel like a home. It felt like a waiting room, like he was just passing time until something else happened. What that something else was, he had no idea. The next morning, Daniel got to work early. He made his coffee, settled at his desk, and tried to focus. But he couldn't stop looking toward the design department area, even though he couldn't see Lucia's desk from where he sat. He wondered if she was already there, if she'd be watching him again today. And sure enough, around 10:30, when he went to refill his coffee, there she was, standing by the window in the hallway, holding her own mug, looking right at him. This time, Daniel decided to do something about it. He took a breath and walked toward her, but the moment he got close, she seemed to panic. Her eyes went wide and she quickly turned and walked away, her coffee sloshing slightly in her cup. Daniel stood there, confused and a little hurt. Why watch him constantly but refuse to actually talk? That's when Tom walked by and noticed Daniel standing alone in the hallway. "You okay, man?" Daniel nodded. "Hey, Tom, what do you know about Lucia? Like, really know?" Tom thought for a second. "Not much. I heard she went through something rough a couple years back. Family stuff, I think. Lost someone close to her." "Why, is she bothering you?" Daniel shook his head quickly. "No, nothing like that. Just curious." But as he walked back to his desk, Daniel's mind was racing. She'd lost someone, and now she was watching him like she was afraid of losing someone else. Daniel couldn't get the thought out of his head. For the next few days, he found himself watching Lucia as much as she watched him. Not in a creepy way, at least he hoped not. He just wanted to understand. Who watches a stranger like that? Who carries that much worry for someone they don't even know? He noticed small things. The way she always carried this worn leather notebook, its edges frayed from years of use. How she'd sketch during boring meetings, her pencil moving quickly across the pages while everyone else zoned out on their phones. She always wore a silver bracelet on her left wrist, and she'd touch it absent-mindedly whenever she seemed stressed or deep in thought. There was a sadness to her. Even when she smiled at coworkers in passing, it didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel recognized that look. He saw it in his own mirror every morning. It was the look of someone who was functioning, going through the motions but not really living. One afternoon, Daniel found himself in the break room with Jennifer, the chatty receptionist who knew everyone's business. He casually mentioned Lucia's name while they waited for the microwave. "Oh, Lucia. Sweet girl but heartbreaking story," Jennifer said, lowering her voice even though they were alone. "She lost her baby brother about 2 years ago. He was only 24. Really tragic. I don't know all the details, but I heard it was unexpected. She took a whole month off work afterward. When she came back, she was different, quieter." Daniel felt his chest tighten. A brother. She'd lost her brother, and now she was watching Daniel like he might disappear too. That evening, both of them ended up working late again. It was becoming a pattern. The office felt different after hours. Quieter, more honest somehow. The walls between people seemed thinner when it was just empty cubicles and humming computers. Daniel was reading through emails when the lights suddenly went out. The entire floor went dark except for the emergency lighting strips along the floor. Someone groaned from a few offices over. "A power outage. Great," Daniel muttered to himself. He saved his work quickly before his laptop battery died and stood up. That's when he saw her. Lucia was standing in the hallway, barely visible in the dim green glow of the emergency lights. "Guess we're done for the day," he said, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "Looks like it," she replied. Her voice was softer than he expected. They both headed toward the stairwell since the elevators were out. 8 floors down. As they started descending, Daniel pulled out his phone flashlight. "This should help." "Thanks," Lucia said. They walked in silence for a floor or two. Then Daniel stopped and sat down on one of the steps. "You mind if we take a break? My knee's been bothering me." It was a lie. His knee was fine. But he needed a reason to stop, to talk to her. Lucia hesitated, then sat down a few steps above him. In the harsh light from his phone, her face looked tired. Daniel reached into his bag and pulled out a thermos. "Coffee? I always make too much." She smiled a little. "Sure." He poured some into the thermos cap and handed it up to her. They sat there in the stairwell, sharing coffee like old friends. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that happens when two people are both carrying heavy things and don't need to pretend otherwise. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel finally said. "Why do you watch me?" Lucia's hand froze halfway to her lips. She set the coffee down carefully. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Daniel thought maybe he'd pushed too far, crossed some line. "You remind me of someone," she said quietly. "Someone I lost," Daniel nodded slowly. "Your brother?" Her eyes widened slightly. "How did you know?" "People talk," he said gently. "I'm sorry. That must have been terrible." Lucia looked down at her hands. In the dim light, Daniel could see her fingers trembling slightly. "I didn't see it," she whispered. He was struggling, and I didn't see it. I was busy with work, with my own life. He'd call, and I'd say I'd call him back later. And then one day, there was no more later. The words hung in the air between them. Daniel felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd been building brick by brick since his marriage fell apart. "And now you see it in me," he said. It wasn't a question. Lucia looked up at him and her eyes were shiny with unshed tears. "I see someone going through the motions. Someone who's there but not really there. Someone who's slowly disappearing and nobody's noticing." Daniel wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was wrong, that he was fine, that he was handling everything just fine. But sitting there in that stairwell in the emergency lighting with someone who actually saw him, he couldn't lie. "I don't know how to not disappear," he admitted. His voice cracked slightly. "Everything just feels heavy all the time." "I know," Lucia said. "And I can't save you. I learned that the hard way. I couldn't save my brother and I can't save you either." "Then why watch me?" She took a shaky breath. "Because maybe if someone had just sat with my brother in his darkness, just been present without trying to fix everything, maybe he would have known he wasn't alone. Maybe that would have been enough to hold on." They sat in that stairwell for another 20 minutes. The power came back on, lights flickering to life above them. But neither of them moved right away. Because something had shifted. Two strangers had become something more. Not friends yet, but not strangers anymore either. Something in between. Something that felt like the first real thing Daniel had experienced in months. The conversation in the stairwell changed everything. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Lucia started having lunch together. Not every day, but often enough that people around the office started noticing. They'd sit in the cafeteria or sometimes walk to the small park across the street, talking about everything and nothing. Lucia never pushed him to open up, which somehow made Daniel want to talk more. She'd share stories about her brother, Raphael, how he used to make terrible jokes that only he found funny. How he collected vintage video games. How he'd send her random memes at 2 in the morning. She spoke about him like he was still alive, keeping his memory present and real. Daniel found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. How the divorce wasn't really about the big dramatic fights or betrayal. It was quieter than that. He and his wife had just slowly drifted apart, like two boats that forgot they were tied together. By the time they noticed, the distance was too great to cross. "I think the worst part," Daniel said one afternoon while they sat on a park bench, "is feeling like I failed at the one thing I was supposed to get right. Everyone else manages to keep their marriages together. Why couldn't I?" Lucia picked at her sandwich. "My brother used to say something similar. Why couldn't he just be happy like everyone else? Why was everything so hard for him when other people made it look easy?" She paused. "But that's the thing. Nobody's finding it easy. We're all just pretending better than we think we are." Daniel started noticing his own patterns. The way he'd sit in his car for 10 minutes before going into his apartment, dreading the emptiness. How he'd forgotten the last time he actually enjoyed a meal instead of just eating because he was supposed to. The mornings when getting out of bed felt like moving through concrete. "I think I might not be okay," he told Lucia one day. Just saying the words out loud felt like admitting defeat. "I know," she said gently. "I've known for a while. Am I that obvious?" She shook her head. "No, most people don't see it. But I learned what to look for. After Raphael, I promised myself I'd never miss the signs again." That evening, Daniel went home and did something he hadn't done in months. He called his sister back. When she answered, surprise clear in her voice, he said, "I think I need help." The silence on the other end lasted just a moment. Then his sister's voice thick with emotion. "I've been waiting for you to say that. I've been so worried, Danny. Starting therapy wasn't some magical fix. The first session was awkward, and Daniel almost didn't go back. But Lucia encouraged him. It took me a year of therapy to even begin processing what happened with Raphael," she admitted. "Some weeks I hated it. Some weeks it was the only thing keeping me afloat." Daniel kept going, week after week, sitting in that small office with the therapist who never seemed shocked by anything he said. Slowly, very slowly, things started shifting. Not better exactly, but different. Like someone had turned on a dim light in a dark room. It wasn't bright, but at least he could start seeing the shapes of things. He started sleeping slightly better, started eating actual meals instead of whatever was quickest, even rejoined the basketball group he used to play with before the divorce. He was rusty and tired easily, but it felt good to move his body again, to be around people who didn't know him as the divorced guy. Lucia showed him her notebook one day. Page after page of sketches and notes, observations about people, Small details that might mean someone was struggling, phone numbers for crisis hotlines, resources, quotes that helped her. After Raphael, I became obsessed, she explained. I couldn't save him, so I thought maybe I could save someone else. Anyone else? I watched people constantly looking for the signs I missed with him. That sounds exhausting, Daniel said. It was. It is, she closed the notebook. My therapist says I'm trying to fix the past by controlling the present. She's probably right. But you helped me, Daniel pointed out. Maybe. Or maybe you would have figured it out on your own eventually. She smiled sadly. That's the hard part. I'll never know. Just like I'll never know if Raphael would still be here if I'd done things differently. The real crisis came when Daniel got a text from his ex-wife. She was getting remarried. Would he mind if she came by to get the last few boxes from the garage? She hoped they could be happy for each other. Daniel read the text 5 times. Then he turned off his phone and sat in his apartment in the dark. The old feelings came rushing back. Failure, worthlessness, the sense that everyone else was moving forward while he was stuck. He ignored calls from his sister, skipped therapy, called in sick to work for 3 days straight. On the 3rd day, someone knocked on his door. Daniel ignored it. They knocked again, and again. Finally, he dragged himself off the couch and opened the door. Lucia stood there holding a bag of takeout food. I pulled your address from the employee directory, she said. Which is probably against company policy, but I'm breaking a lot of rules lately. Daniel didn't have the energy to tell her to leave. He just opened the door wider and let her in. She didn't comment on the mess, the closed curtains, the days of dishes in the sink. She just set the food on the coffee table and sat down on the floor. You don't have to talk, she said. I'm just going to sit here for a while. If that's okay. Daniel sat back down on the couch. And Lucia stayed. She didn't try to fix him or cheer him up. She just sat there in his dark apartment, being present, being proof that he wasn't completely alone even when it felt like he was. Sometimes that's all anyone needs. Just someone willing to sit in the darkness with them. After that night, something shifted between them. Daniel went back to therapy, and this time he was honest about how bad things had gotten. His therapist adjusted his treatment plan, and they talked about medication as an option. Daniel had always resisted the idea before, seeing it as another failure, but he was tired of feeling this way, tired of just surviving instead of living. Lucia shared her own journey. I was on medication for almost a year after Raphael died, she told him during one of their coffee meetings. Some people need glasses to see clearly. I needed medicine to think clearly. There's no shame in it. They developed a routine. Every Monday morning they'd meet 15 minutes before work started. Check-in coffee, Lucia called it. They'd sit in the lobby cafe and honestly tell each other how they were doing. Not the polite I'm fine they told everyone else, but the real truth. I'm at about a 6 today, Daniel might say. Had a rough weekend, but I'm managing. 4, Lucia might respond. Raphael's birthday is next week. It's always hard. The numbers became their shorthand, a way to communicate without having to explain everything. Their co-workers noticed the friendship, and some were clearly curious about it. But Daniel and Lucia didn't explain. It wasn't a relationship that fit into easy categories. It was deeper than friendship, but not romantic. More like 2 people who'd found each other in the dark and decided to help each other find the light. Daniel started rebuilding his life in small ways. He painted his apartment walls, covering the boring beige with actual colors. He bought plants, even though he'd probably kill them. He started cooking real meals and invited his sister over for dinner. The first time was awkward, but the second time was better. He even went on a date. Just one, and it didn't lead anywhere, but it proved to himself that he could still do normal things. That he wasn't completely broken. Lucia was making progress too. She talked about how she was learning to let go of the constant vigilance. My therapist and I are working on accepting that I can't save everyone. That Raphael's death wasn't my fault, even though it feels like it was. Does it get easier? Daniel asked. Some days, she admitted. Other days it feels just as fresh as the day it happened. But I'm learning that grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry differently. One afternoon, Lucia mentioned she'd started seeing someone. A guy named Christopher who worked in marketing at another company. Daniel felt a weird twist in his stomach at the news. Not jealousy exactly, but something adjacent to it. He'd gotten used to having Lucia's attention, her concern. The thought of sharing that felt strange. That's great, he said, meaning it mostly. What's he like? Lucia's face lit up in a way Daniel hadn't seen before. He's kind, patient. He knows about Raphael, about everything, and he doesn't try to fix me. He just accepts me as I am. Over the next few weeks, Daniel noticed Lucia watching him less. She was still there for their Monday coffees, still responded to his texts, but the intensity had faded. She was building her own life, and that meant having less energy to focus on saving him. At first, it scared Daniel. What if he fell apart again without her constant presence? But his therapist helped him understand that this was actually healthy. You can't build your recovery on one person, she explained. You need a whole support system. Friends, family, professionals. Lucia was a catalyst, but she can't be your only reason to keep going. Daniel pushed himself to strengthen other connections. He started calling his sister regularly, not just in crisis. He became friends with some guys from the basketball group, grabbing beers after games. He even repaired his relationship with his parents, who'd been hurt by his isolation after the divorce. The real test came during the holidays. Last year, Daniel had spent Christmas alone in his apartment, ignoring calls from family. This year, he went to his sister's house. It was loud and chaotic with her kids running around, but it felt good. Normal. Like he was part of something again. Lucia invited him to her family's celebration too. He met her parents, who hugged him tightly when Lucia explained how they'd become friends. Her mother cried a little. "Thank you for letting her help you," she said quietly. "She's been carrying so much guilt. Knowing she made a difference for someone means everything to her." Daniel realized then that their relationship had helped both of them. He wasn't just the broken one being saved. They'd saved each other in different ways. In January, Daniel got offered a promotion. It would mean moving to the company's Boston office. Better pay, better opportunities, a fresh start. A year ago, he would have turned it down without thinking. The idea of starting over somewhere new would have been terrifying. But now it felt like possibility. He told Lucia over coffee, watching her face carefully. She smiled, genuine and warm. "Daniel, that's amazing. Are you going to take it?" "I think so," he said. "Is that crazy? 6 months ago, I could barely get out of bed, and now I'm thinking about moving to a new city." "That's not crazy," Lucia said firmly. "That's growth. That's you choosing life instead of just existing in it." "I'm going to miss our Monday coffees," Daniel admitted. "We'll video chat," Lucia said. "Distance doesn't mean the friendship ends. It just changes shape." Daniel looked at her sitting across from him, this woman who'd watched him like a secret she couldn't tell, who'd seen his darkness and hadn't looked away, who'd sat with him until he could find his own light. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. For watching me even when it was probably weird. For not giving up on me." Lucia reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for letting me be there. For giving my grief a purpose." And in that moment, Daniel understood. They'd both been healing each other all along. The going-away party was scheduled for a Friday evening. The office had chipped in for a cake and decorations. Daniel felt strange being the center of attention, but in a good way. People came up to congratulate him, to say they'd miss him. Some he'd barely spoken to, but they seemed genuine. Lucia had been quieter than usual all week. During their last Monday coffee before his move, she'd seemed distracted. Daniel asked if everything was okay with Christopher, and she assured him it was, but something was off. "Can we meet for actual coffee before you leave?" she asked. "Not the office cafe. The place where we had our first real conversation." Daniel knew exactly what she meant. The coffee shop near the office where they'd gone after that day in the stairwell. "Of course," he said. They met on Thursday evening. The coffee shop was busy with the after-work crowd, but they found a table in the back corner. Lucia had her worn leather notebook with her, which she usually didn't bring to their casual meetups. "I need to tell you something," she started, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "Something I should have told you a long time ago, but I was scared." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "Okay." Lucia took a deep breath. "That first day I saw you back in the meeting room months ago, I knew. Not thought, not suspected. I knew you were in danger. How could you possibly know that?" Daniel asked gently. "I don't know how to explain it without sounding crazy," she said. "But after Raphael, something changed in me. I became hyper-aware of certain patterns, certain signs. And when I saw you that day, it was like looking at a ghost of my brother, the way you held your shoulders. The emptiness in your eyes. How you were there, but not really there. She opened her notebook and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I did something I'm not proud of. I looked you up. Found your social media, which you hadn't updated in months. Found public records about your divorce. I learned everything I could about you. Daniel felt a chill run through him. This should have felt like a violation, but somehow it didn't. I became obsessed, Lucia continued, her voice shaking slightly. I watched you constantly because I was terrified. Terrified that I was seeing the same pattern I missed with Raphael. That one day I'd come to work and you'd just be gone and I'd have failed again. Lucia, Daniel started, but she held up her hand. Let me finish, please. She wiped at her eyes. I crossed lines. I violated your privacy. I made your struggle about my trauma. I turned you into a second chance to save my brother, which wasn't fair to you or to Raphael's memory. She looked directly at him, tears streaming down her face now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for watching you like that, for making you my project, for not respecting boundaries. You deserve better than someone using you to heal their own wounds. The coffee shop noise faded into the background. Daniel sat with her words, processing them. He thought about all those weeks of feeling watched, feeling seen, how it had bothered him at first, then comforted him, then eventually saved him. Can I tell you something? He said finally. That day I opened my door and you were standing there with takeout food. That was my worst day. The day I'd decided I was done trying. Done with everything. Lucia's hand flew to her mouth. I didn't have a plan exactly, Daniel continued. But I was at the edge, Lucia. Right at the edge. And then you knocked on my door. You sat in my dark apartment and just existed there with me, and something about not being alone in that moment pulled me back. He reached across and took her hand. So yeah, maybe you crossed some boundaries. Maybe you projected your trauma onto me. But you know what? You saved my life. However imperfect your methods were, they worked. But I shouldn't have needed to, Lucia said. You shouldn't have been that close to the edge in the first place. The system failed you. Your friends and family failed you. I just noticed what everyone else was too busy to see. But you did see, Daniel insisted. That's what matters. You saw me when I was invisible. And yeah, it came from your pain with Raphael. But pain that transforms into action, into caring, into refusing to look away. That's not something to apologize for. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lucia said quietly, I couldn't save my brother. But maybe by being there for you, I honored his memory, made his loss mean something. It did mean something, Daniel assured her. It meant everything. The going-away party the next night was bittersweet. Daniel made his rounds, thanking people, exchanging contact information. When he got to Lucia, she was standing by the window, but she wasn't watching him with that intense, protective gaze anymore. She was just smiling, normal and relaxed. You look different, he told her. I feel different, she admitted. Lighter somehow, like I finally put down something heavy I'd been carrying. The secret you couldn't tell? The secret I couldn't tell, she confirmed. And now that it's out there, now that you know everything, I feel like I can finally breathe again. 2 months later, Daniel was settled into his Boston apartment. It was smaller than his place back home, but it had big windows and good light. He'd hung up actual pictures on the walls, bought furniture that felt like him, created a space that felt like a home rather than a waiting room. One Saturday morning, he went for a run in his new neighborhood. On his way back, he noticed his neighbor sitting on the front steps of the building. Young guy, probably mid-20s, staring at his phone with an expression Daniel recognized, that empty, hollow look. Daniel slowed down. For a moment, he thought about just running past. It wasn't his business. He didn't know this person. But then he thought about Lucia leaning against that wall, watching him like a secret she couldn't tell, how her refusal to look away had given him permission to not give up. Hey, Daniel said, stopping at the steps. I'm Daniel. Just moved in last month. The young man looked up, startled. Oh, hey, I'm Alex. You doing okay? Daniel asked. And I mean actually okay, not the polite version we tell strangers. Alex's eyes widened slightly. For a moment, Daniel thought he'd overstepped. But then Alex's face crumpled just a little. Honestly? Not really. But I don't think anyone wants to hear about that. Daniel sat down on the steps. I do, if you want to talk. Or if you don't want to talk, I can just sit here for a while. Sometimes that helps too. And there, on the steps of his new building in a city where he barely knew anyone, Daniel became for someone else what Lucia had been for him. A person who noticed. A person who refused to look away. The secret Lucia couldn't tell had become a gift Daniel could give. The gift of being seen, of knowing you're not invisible even in your darkest moments, of understanding that someone watching you carefully isn't always a threat. Sometimes it's a lifeline. And sometimes the people who save us are the ones who've been broken themselves and know exactly what drowning looks like.